God is watching us. God is watching us. God is watching us from a distance. So concludes the song From a Distance, best known in Bette Midler's 1990 rendition. In the song, our beautiful world is filled with harmony and free of hunger, disease, and bombs, but only from a distance. God is far removed in the composer's eyes, and so from his perch high above, it's as though he gazes on teeming humanity, all 7.5 billion of us, who must appear as countless tiny specks inching slowly along on the face of the earth. So insignificant, each of them, far smaller than individual ants appear to you and me as they swarm in an immense collective along the edge of a sidewalk. We tiny specks seem hardly worth a second glance from God. But brothers and sisters, God is not like an indifferent Zeus toying with all the creatures far below. Rather, to us, God is Father, or Abba, as Jesus addressed him, which means Daddy. Every one of those specks is known intimately to Abba, from Abdul to Kabaka to Thanwin to Julio to Susie. God follows each more carefully than an investor tracks his stocks and a betting man studies the horses. Rather than distant, Abba is very close. And rather than just watching, he is incredibly active in the comings, goings, worries, and joys of every single one of those seeming specks that really is a human being. And Abba insists that you and I recognize our bond with every member of that 7.5 billion. He does not sort us the way we do. He doesn't sort us by the 325 million living in central North America, or the 1.3 billion filling that chunk of Asian real estate that thrusts into the Indian Ocean, or the 24 million on an island off of southeastern Africa's coast. Abba knows that all of us are one. I love Malley's chocolate. So take a 1 pound box of Malley's. Every piece of chocolate in that box can look and taste different, but all of them are still scrumptious chocolate. How can a chocolate-covered almond refuse to associate with a coconut haystack? How can the pieces of candy at one end of the box say to their mates at the other end that they are not really that important or of concern because they're at that other end of the box, so far away? That would be unfaithful to the divine chocolatier who fashioned all of them and loves them all equally. Jesus often crossed paths with proud, learned Jewish leaders who looked askance at the little, insignificant ones on the fringes and remained aloof from them, though Abba had asked that they treasure these little ones. what from a distance looks like harmony often proves very different in reality. Will the time come when the proud see that they in truth are one with the humble of the earth? Chocolate-covered raisins might not seem much to chocolate-covered truffles, but they're all part of the same box. Jesus tells us his yoke is easy and his burden light. By yoke, he means his way of life. And considering that his way brought him to crucifixion, naturally a person might wonder how such a yoke ever could be called easy. What Jesus is saying is that with his help, that yoke will not be too heavy for us. To accept that help requires that we listen to him. And so the question arises, my friends, to whom are we listening? We who are blessed with much and rich lands like our own are tempted to distance ourselves from the suffering that blights the lives of so many of the 7.175 billion who dwell far from us. And there are voices in our society that encourage us in this, insisting that our interests are paramount. However, this is not of Christ, who, instead of putting himself first, took the last place, choosing to die for all, from greatest to least. As we who are fortunate to live in the United States, especially we who follow Jesus, contend with this temptation to put ourselves first, listening to the words of St. Paul in today's verses from his letter to the Romans would serve us well. He is warning us against allowing sin to dominate us. That's what he means by the phrase, living according to the flesh. This is not a reference to sexual sin. Rather, flesh stands for rebellious, unrepentant humanity. God's intention is that we live according to the Spirit given to us in baptism. The Spirit freed us from sin and empowers us to resist the inclination we have towards sin. For all 7.5 billion of us, sin must become a thing of the past. Otherwise, harmony, peace, and justice will remain only a mirage hovering on a distant horizon. How essential it is that humankind walk in the path of our just and meek King, who entered Jerusalem not on a war horse or in a chariot, but on a common little donkey, as envisioned by the prophet Zechariah in our first reading. We Christians play an indispensable part in making God's vision for the world a reality. Jesus has chosen all of us to instruct the world as we follow in his way as to what it means to live authentically. As you and I know, this takes the form of dying to ourselves, putting ourselves last, not first. It is the way of the Beatitudes, which Matthew presents to us earlier in his gospel in chapter 5. Thus, by being poor in spirit, the first beatitude, we trust not in money or in power, but in God. As peacemakers, the subject of the seventh beatitude, we live without violence, oppression, or injustice, intent on being a sign of peace for the whole world, in keeping with the peace that we offer to one another here at Mass. In accordance with the fifth beatitude, we are merciful, and so we forgive all injuries, comfort the sorrowful, pray for others, provide for the needy, welcome strangers, and visit the imprisoned. Our merciful Savior calls us, unworthy though we are, to the supper of the Lamb at that table. Having been fed on his body and blood, it's our task then to go forth to all the world and glorify God by our lives. Abba has loved into existence 7.5 billion people around the globe, and not one of them lies outside your sphere of loving service and mine. Since Jesus died for all of them, may we always recognize our responsibility to share our bread with the starving in Ethiopia or India or Bolivia, who, though strangers to us, remain our brothers and sisters. How necessary it is that we learn from Jesus by taking his yoke upon us. He teaches us that the burden of one must be the burden of all. The 325 million here in the U.S. cannot separate themselves from the other 7.175 billion any more than the body can manage without its liver. Ours is a mighty nation, one that is tempted to give priority to our selfish interests while perhaps tossing bread crusts to the distant needy. But my friends, who is truly mighty? It is Abba, of course. As our psalm reminds us, the mighty one is gracious and merciful, kind and compassionate. He lifts up all who are falling and raises all who are bowed down. Let this be the stance taken by our country, both at home and around the world. God is close at hand, not distant. Far from just watching, God is intimately involved in the life of every one of the 7.5 billion he formed in his image. And he has made clear through Jesus that our job as Christians is to be true to the bond connecting us to all members of the human family, with a special concern for the least ones. A distant God would see us as billions of insignificant specks. However, this is not Abba's way, and it must not be yours and mine either. Near at hand or far removed, no child of God lies outside our sphere of loving service.